So introduce my guest joining us on this broadcast, Prabhu Dayal, former diplomat, and Sreeram Chaulia, foreign affairs expert. Gentlemen, good morning to both of you. Good to have you on the broadcast with us. Sreeram, let me begin with you. How crucial is this first in-person Quad summit, the first bilateral with Biden going to be for India, considering the fact we're still in the middle of a pandemic? COVID becomes really important, and also the crisis that's playing out in Afghanistan.
Yeah, it's good to have in-person diplomacy again because there's been a long hiatus of 2 years of these virtual summits and online meetings, which tend to be very scripted. So to have, direct one-on-one with leaders is very important, and that's why we have packed the Prime Minister's schedule in such a way that he maximizes the physical contact with important stakeholders. Of course, Biden being the #1 because it's the host country and there's a direct bilateral, but also on the sidelines, we are meeting many other partners. And I think the idea is to steer the discussion based on our national interests, as always. And clearly, there are some outstanding points that Maha and you have been raising. Definitely, the COVID vaccine initiative of Quad is an important one because we are now all set to resume our exports of vaccines after a hiatus. So that the world is looking forward to. There are many countries dependent on India and hopeful that India will come back to the game and be the game changer. So I think the US and the rest of the Quad countries do want to encourage us on that path, and they will be supporting us. I think the other thing, like you mentioned, the security situation is quite bad in our western region, northwestern region, and I think we will want the US to continue to remain committed to Afghanistan, Pakistan, even after their military withdrawal. I think that's our major interest. We want them not to abandon and completely neglect this area now that they're out of it. So even though we cooperate and we want the US in a big way in the Indo-Pacific, we also will want them to maintain their counter-terrorism posture and counter-terrorism policies with regard to Afghanistan and Pakistan. I think Prime Minister is going to present more evidence and viewpoints of what is going on in the region, especially the Pakistani shenanigans, and how we need to tighten the noose around them so as to not allow Afghanistan to become a haven for regional and global terror again. So I think there's going to be more of an emphasis on coordination between India and the US to ensure that, we could not stop the regime from falling in Kabul, but at least to maintain the counterterrorism posture. And I think, of course, China, like you said, is always on the table whenever India and the US meet. And we are going to now look at infrastructure, semiconductors, technology. Biden is talking not just of oppression, but of technological exploitation by China of smaller countries and how we need to put up alternatives. So I think there's a lot that we have to do in order to secure both our western flank and, of course, the vast Indo-Pacific region where there is a real challenge of Chinese hegemony, and countering that hegemony is our #1 objective.
Sreeram Chaulia, before I get discussing about this bilateral with US President Joe Biden, because that's going to be very crucial in terms of manufacturing, whether India can be seen as an alternative, the meeting with the top honchos, I also want to discuss the events that have led up before Quad as well, especially a lot of interest around this alliance between the Australia, UK and US AUKUS, it's being called, even though Harsh Shringla has openly said that this security alliance has no impact on Quad. A lot was said whether this could take away from some of the agenda of the Quad as well.
Yeah, the UK is not part of the Quad. So UK, Australia, US trilateral alliance is a kind of an Anglo-Saxon kind of thing, and it is in many ways weakening our efforts to create a joint front, which also includes France. So excluding France, alienating France is not a good idea. And if you followed, the Prime Minister just spoke to Emmanuel Macron
and he put out
before
a tweet.
departing.
Right.
Yeah, and the reason is simple. We want both France and these Anglo-Saxon countries and all of them to be jointly involved in counterbalancing China. We don't want multiple camps to emerge, so that will, fragment the strategic coordination, because we have ongoing, in fact, we have a France, Australia, India trilateral. What happens to the trilateral? It's been completely undermined now because of the US actions. So there are some problems with regard to the way the US continues to act in a selfish way. There's a continuity from Trump to Biden on these fronts. And, so that's where I think we will want to impress upon the Americans that we have to think about a grand coalition. What they are thinking about is something narrower. If we want Quad Plus, France should have been part of Quad Plus.
Yeah.
Now, the prospects of Quad Plus involving France are diminishing because of the US actions. Of course, independently, we would want the Europeans to also come in a big way here, and that's a separate thing because we are not probably engaging much with the Europeans on this trip. But the basic point is, there are many contradictions among ourselves, among Quad members, and we are somewhat diverging pathways. We are not focusing wholeheartedly and single-mindedly on countering China. And I think that's something we need to put across to the Americans. While Biden is saying we are going to compete, we are going to really push back China, on the other hand, he's doing things which are actually undermining this objective. So I think
of course, China is on the table. And as Sreeram was rightly pointing out, that every time when India and US are talking, China is never off the table. COVID, climate change, vaccines, a lot really to look forward to in the next few days. Sreeram, how do you read this statement that has come in by the Prime Minister, essentially outlining on what we can expect of the next few days, and also very categorically outlining what his address at the UNGA will look like?
Yeah, the Prime Minister always goes with a plan. He's a very, very organized statesman on the world stage, and he has got his national objectives to achieve from this important overseas visit. And clearly, he's highlighting all the aspects that relate to our concerns. We do have some concerns. I think those are going to be laid out, especially with regard to the terrorism problem in our neighborhood. It has multiplied many folds since the fall of the Afghan government to the Taliban, and the US role there has not been, US has not covered itself in any glory. It has been questionable, its choices, its the conduct at the end was a rather disgraceful exit. And now the question is, will the US completely pack up and leave the arena, or will they continue to exert influence there? And we would like them to stay interested. Generally, history shows whenever the US leaves militarily, then their media, the policymakers, the whole attention also shifts away. So it's in a way they wash their hands off the problem, but we don't want that to happen. We want them to remain engaged in this region. So I think that's going to be a top priority for us, and the PM is going to talk about the situation in Afghanistan the way we see it, because the way Americans see it, especially now that they have very less stakes there, they are only wondering whether there will be global terror attacks, meaning against the US homeland or against US citizens. Otherwise, they don't seem to be bothered. So we are going to emphasize the point. Biden says allies. Biden always says multilateralism. Biden says we will have the back of our allies and our partners. If so, let us, let him prove it through actions. We want them to be involved, use their financial, diplomatic, and other means to be able to control this menace. And of course, Indo-Pacific is there. PM has been mentioning that, and so is the COVID-19 challenge and all these things. India can be a provider of solutions, but we also need the support of other partners. We can't do it alone. India does not believe in unilateralism or in unipolarity or bipolarity. We want a multipolar world and multilateral actions. So I think PM's meetings with the Quad partners, he has been underlining that. It's very important because we want to come up with a joint front on all these problems where India is a major contributor to the solutions, but not the sole one. We cannot do it on our own. So we believe in engagement, we believe in cooperation, and that is the whole purpose of the PM's visit.
Mr. Sreeram Chaulia, it's great that we're having that bilateral, and the hope from the Indian side is that this will further lead to strengthening of ties between India and the United States. But talking about the tangible steps that we can expect from the US administration, would you agree with that assessment of Mr. Prabhu Dayal, that so far US hasn't been very forthcoming when it comes to countering terror from Pakistan?
Yeah, I think they used to always justify this inaction on the grounds of their dependence on Pakistan for the Afghan logistics and the supply lines and the intelligence cooperation, and for using Pakistan as a staging ground for aerial attacks and drone strikes and all those things. So now, obviously, Pakistan has become very hostile to them, and it's not going to give them any such basing rights because of the extreme Islamist and jihadist sentiment within Pakistan, and because of the China factor. They think that they've got another benefactor who can bail them out or keep them happy, even if the US becomes antagonistic to them. So now it's quite clear there's a Sino-Pakistan axis that's acting against Western interests, and of course also against Indian interests and against the interests of the people of Afghanistan and of Central Asian countries. So it's very important that we try to find alternative coalitions that will push back the Sino-Pakistan axis in the region and do not allow their tentacles to spread. I think that's our major geopolitical goal, and that's one of the objectives of the PM's US visit and bilateral with Biden. They should understand the kind of game that China is trying to play behind the scenes, using Pakistan as their front to keep on expanding the CPEC and the Belt and Road Initiative, and to ultimately try and dominate the whole of Central Asia. And that's not good for Russia either. So I think Sino-Pakistan nexus has, of course, not a new thing. It's been there forever, but now they are believe that they've got a huge opportunity to expand with the fall of the regime in Afghanistan. So very important that while we look at China as the main problem in Indo-Pacific, on the other side, to the south of the Indian peninsula, there is also the China factor on the western side. And I think we need to tell the Americans they have to look at this region not purely from the lens of jihadist terror. Of course, jihadist terror is the immediate threat, but there is a longer-term geopolitical threat of Chinese expansion also in this region. And all the more reason why the US should not completely abandon this. And all the more reason why the US should tighten the screws on Pakistan, because if Pakistan is scot-free or allowed to operate with its usual brazenness and as a sponsor of terrorism, it will only benefit China, or it may even hurt China. That's a bigger problem. But at least the Chinese will look at it as their victory at the cost of the West.
And I want to take that point to Mr. Prabhu Dayal as